How's that? Hey, first try. That's amazing. How about that? We had an applause ovation for a violin solo. Huh? You don't see that every day. Congratulations for that. I can't tell you how glad I am to be here today, and I'm a little nervous because I haven't been speaking in front of people for a few years. But my first speaking engagement was at a Unity church, and actually not at a Unity church, it was at a hotel, but at an event sponsored by a Unity church. And I don't know, some of you look about my age, so maybe you remember the Winter Circle breakfasts that Unity used to sponsor. A lot of people in sales would go to those, and they'd have motivational speakers from all over the country that would come around and talk to us and try to keep us pumped up so we could go out and make a living that week. And clearly they did a pretty good job because a lot of us are still alive, so we did pretty good. But anyway, I was 15 years old that day, and I got to speak on Yogananda and the Kriya Yoga movement in the United States. And I was struck as I was thinking about what I wanted to say to you guys today about how positive that experience was and how hopeful we all were for the upcoming millennium and the changes that were going to be coming. And it was amazing the energy that people were building towards that new big crossover into the 2000s. And I want you to know, don't give up hope. Sometime you got to outlast the bastards. So,
oh my gosh.
Can I say that? That's good. I get in trouble with the priests all the time for saying inappropriate stuff. And I was in fourth grade one day, and the priest was in there telling us that transubstantiation of the body and blood of Jesus is literal. It's not symbolic, and we must understand this is a literal thing that we're doing. And I raised my little hand at fourth grade, and I said, so you're telling me God sent his only son down here to legalize cannibalism? Oh my God. Oh my God. There's about an 80-year-old priest we had that day. And I watched his head, and it was like his veins just went purple and purpler. And then his face got beet red, and he started to come around the desk. And I've never seen the nun move so fast in my life. She got between me and the priest, and she said, Jim, I think you better step out for a minute. Thank God I escaped that one, because it wasn't the last, but it was definitely traumatic. Patrick, where's Patrick? There he is. I'm surprised we didn't see each other anyway, but you know, one of the blessings of teaching is they get one teacher. I'd get 200 teachers a year. You know? So although they thought they were really lucky to have me, I learned, I think, way more from them than I was ever able to teach them. Not that I didn't try to teach them, but I was thinking of Medical Lake, and I was in the applied psych program out at Eastern, and one of my colleagues there was doing their clinical at there, and she was telling me what she was doing, and this was a counseling psychology program, and I can't tell you there were none of those back then. This is 55, 60 years ago, a long time ago. And so we actually were working with people where all the other psych programs were chasing rats around in little boxes and trying to time how long it took the rat to get through the maze. Now, that may have been more apropos than I realized for real life. But I kind of liked working with people, you know. And so I said, what are you doing out there? She said, well, I'm on, we called it in those days the profound war. And I doubt if they call it that today, but that's what it was called then. And these are the people who have below 60, I think, IQs, and many, many issues to deal with, right? And so I went out there with her in my usual pompous way. I kind of have a tendency towards that sometimes. And I thought, well, this should be interesting to see her practice these skills on these folks, right? And she goes in there and she worked with this resident who is trying to learn how to use a spoon, right? And after about a half an hour, this person was able to get the spoon to their mouth without her assistance and feed themselves. Now they could only do 1 or 2 spoonfuls, right? But they made progress. And I got one of my huge lessons in life from that experience, because as I was sitting there thinking, well, not much happened there, right? She looked at me and gave me the gift. Now this was the gift, right? She gave me the gift of, Jim, I didn't know I was going to say this, Patrick, was it your fault? That client just made more progress today than you will make in your whole career. And you know what? She was right. And so once again, God slaps me with another lesson in humility. I go home and clearly it impacted me. I'm still talking about it with you today, you know. But it wasn't just one of those either. It was all the time students would, you know, come up and say things or do things. We used to do an assignment in my class, which was students often come in and they carry a lot of trauma with them, especially my students. I ended up, I went to Gonzaga University and worked for about 2 years and found out they don't pay. And luckily I did get the scholarship, so I got to go there for free. So that paid me, but they didn't pay real salaries. And then I went to University of Puget Sound, worked in the counseling center for a couple of years, and found out they don't pay either. But worse than Gonzaga, they fired their tenure track faculty after about 4 years, so they don't ever get to tenure. And so then they don't get to stay. So I said, I think I want to go work with the poor people at the community college. And that's what I did. And that turned out to be one of the best decisions of my life. Because there, I saw people who really wanted to learn, but often didn't have much of an understanding of how to go about doing that. Most of them had been traumatized in school by that one teacher who decided that they knew better than you how far you could go in life. There's a lot of reentry women who said, you know, I had a teacher when I was in junior high, and she said I could not go to college because I wasn't smart enough. You know, really? How did she know that? She reminded me of a young teacher who came in and said to his boss, I don't know whether they're going to be able to learn this stuff. They're not very smart. And she looked at me and gave me the gift. And the gift she gave me was, Jim, you're a real smart guy, but you're not near as smart as you think you are about these people. And she says, I can tell you this, having done this a while longer, that you have no idea where they're going to go and how far they're going to go. And that was just such an amazing gift to receive, you know. And it goes on. My students continue. They go out and they get these jobs, and then they get a better job, and then they write and tell me they're buying a house and they have a car and, their lives are working. And what they don't remember is I remember the first day of class. A lot of them are coming out of treatment or coming out of jail or been in the domestic violence shelter for quite a while, trying to pull themselves together. And I just thought, wow, you have no idea how far you've come. And I think of that young teacher and think, you've come a little ways too. Because it was powerful to see what people do, And got a couple other little stories to tell you about the gift. And one of the gifts came from a guy named Woody. Now, Woody was at the Day Health Center. He was an old guy like some of us that are here. And Woody was one of the people that Ronald Reagan helped to get independent living, as they called it, by kicking him out of the institution that he had been in his whole life. And I was shocked to know that many of the people we have in our adult day health program had been in the institution their whole life. But as horrible as that sounds to you, here again, slow on the uptake, Jim Carroll, these people talked about their years in the institution as I talk about my years at Western Washington State University and my years at Gonzaga. It was like their college. They had their favorite psychiatrist, and they had their favorite nurse, and they had the one they hated, And you realize, oh my God, these people somehow made a life out of that life, And Woody was one of those people, and so Woody had been pretty institutionalized, but he had what they call the palsy, which I have a lot of sympathy for now because I have what they call an involuntary tremor. So Woody would come up to me about 7 to 10 days before the end of the month. Jim, have you got your check? And I'd go, no, Woody, you don't get your check yet. You got 7 more days. He says, 7 more days? Yeah. He says, I don't have my check yet. I says, I know, Woody, you got 7 more days. Now, Woody would meet me every day I came to work, right, for those 7 days, and tell me he didn't get his check. And about the 3rd day before his check was coming, right, I said, Woody, you get your check on the 1st. He says, yeah, my government check. I said, right, your government check. He says, it's coming? I said, yeah, it's coming on the 1st, like it always does. Okay, did you get yours? Now here's the gift, right? I said, no, Woody, I don't get my check on the 1st. I get my check on the 10th and the 25th. He said, well, that's not right. And I said, well, I work for Marquardt, which was the name of the center I was running. And he said, well, yeah, but you should be getting your check. And I said, well, I appreciate the support, but Marquardt pays me. He says, right. He says, well, where does Marquardt get its money? And I said, well, they get their money from the city and the county. And he says, yeah. He says, well, what are those? And I said, look at him and I go, they're the government. I hope all the people in here who think they want the government out of their life hear this story. Because without the government in your life, there's a lot of you that wouldn't be here. And I'm just one of you. So, a million great lessons and a million great gifts. But I got one more for you, and then I'm going to shut up because I don't know how long I'm supposed to talk. But I'm an Irishman, and I can get going and keep going. So, but this is the power of one. I call this the power of one. It's another story for me. Gertrude was a client of mine at the Day House Center again. She was in a wheelchair. She'd been in a wheelchair since 40 years old. She'd raised 5 kids in a wheelchair. And she wheels herself back to my office one day. She says, Jim, you're a counselor, right? I said, well, that's what they tell me. And she said, well, can I talk to you? I said, well, yeah, you can talk to me, Gertrude. What do you want to talk about? She said, well, this really bothers me. She said, my husband quit talking about 20 years ago. And he doesn't talk to me. And I said, well, does he talk to anybody else? Not really. But he really doesn't talk to me. And I said, well, God, I'm sad to hear that. I said, you know, what do you think is the issue? She says, well, you know, I haven't been able to get out of this chair. And her hands, you know, she had rheumatoid arthritis. I'm sure most of you have seen that at some point in your life. It's not a pretty thing to live with. And tremendous amount of pain. And yet I don't think I ever saw Gertrude without a smile on her face. Okay? And I said, well, I'd be glad to work with you on that. But we got to work on one thing. She said, well, how are we going to get him to talk? I said, well, we're not. But what we're going to work on is, what do you have left to say to him? And she said, what do you mean? I said, well, how do you feel about him? She said, well, I love him. I mean, how many guys would have stayed with a woman in a wheelchair for 30 years and helped her raise these kids? I mean, I love him. I said, did you ever tell him that? No, he doesn't talk. I said, well, we got our first homework assignment, Gertrude. I want you to tell your husband this week, sometime, that you love him. Well, he won't talk. I go, that's okay. I don't care about him talking. I care about you talking. And so she comes in the next week, and I said, well, how'd it go? She said, well, he didn't say anything. I said, what did you say? I said, I love you. I said, did you say it like that? She said, yeah. So I said, well, we might have to work on your delivery a little bit. It would be hard to get. I love you from here. With the tone of voice you do, she said, that's true. Yeah, it'd be hard for me either. And so she tried it the next week. And I said, what else would you like to do for us? Well, he loves beef stroganoff. And I said, well, beef stroganoff's a great dish. She said, yeah, and I cook it really well. I said, what if you cook him beef stroganoff? Oh, hell, I don't even know if he'd eat it. Well, we call that resistance in the business I'm in. I said, well, why don't you just do it because you want to do it, and to hell with him if he doesn't eat it. And she says, that's a good idea. So she goes home and she cooks him beef stroganoff. And he eats it. And he says, at the end of dinner, thanks. And she about passed out in her chair. But she couldn't wait to roll back and tell me all about it the next week. And she told me all about it. And I said, what changed? And she says, I don't know. I didn't change him. He didn't change. But I said, who changed? She said, well, I changed. I said, huh. There's a pony in here somewhere. Huh? And the power of changing one. You know, we're often so busy trying to get something from the other person that we forget what we want to give to them. And she came rolling in the week after, and she said, well, I just wanted to thank you. I said, well, I didn't do much, but you did. And she said, well, my husband passed away last week. And we went to the hospital, and he's lying in bed, and I'm holding his hand. And I said, you know, I love you. And he looked at me and he said, I know. I love you too. And he passed away. But that's the power of changing one. You always want the other guy to change first. Right? Every couple I had come in for couples counseling, they had a list this long of what the other partner needed to change. This long. I'd say, what are you willing to change? They go, nothing. I'm great. Right? So the power of changing one is the last gift I wanted to share with you. I have a few more things that I want to mention. One is that my beautiful bride, Jenny. Jenny, would you stand up? Come up here with me. Give me a little moral support. This isn't as easy as I make it look. So Jenny and I run a nonprofit, and some of you have children, or they have children who probably could use a little help going to college. Well, as was mentioned in my intro, Jenny and I they give him $5,000 scholarship a year and give it programs. Don't slap me. That's next week. You got to come back. We don't do the faith healings the first week. That's too much. And we give these scholarships out every year to students who learn and do a research project for us during that year on better functioning brains and how to protect your brain and how to act ethically in a way that doesn't, you know, you may not have noticed this if you ever watch the news, but it's like people tell one lie and they just keep going. They got to make up lie after lie after lie after lie after that. So, and you can pick either side for that one too. But it's a interesting thing to study, and as we get into the world that we're moving into, it's really good for the students. You see.
Well, Jim makes it sound like it's all about a heavy, heavy topic, but honestly, what I have the students do is research things that inspire them, but are connected to ethics in their life, in their work, in themselves. And if they're not researching something that touches them, I'm not going to get a paper that's worthy to give to my board members, and they'll wonder, what the heck am I doing? But the students that we do serve are on a spectrum of their growth. There are some that can hardly hold a pencil, and then there are PhD students who have been published all over the world. And they're all equally welcome to apply, and they're all equally welcome to grow in their research development, and I'm here to help them and usher them through that. And if you have students, or if you're going back to school, great. Contact us.
Did you bring any cards for this?
I have cards.
So if you see Jenny have a relative or a friend or yourself, you may be going to school yourself, then come and see us.
Yeah.
Yep, we'd love to help. want to take 1 minute to say how much I appreciate Donna and her partner Phil. They've been incredible friends for us in this community. And I'm so proud of the work she's done in this community. This Unity Church here is a real blessing. Yeah. And I hope the prayer for your new minister is out there and is coming true as we speak, because she's going to be a very hard one to replace. Yeah. Yep. And then the other thing I wanted to say is, as you go through this process of change and lose, you don't just go get another Donna, right? You know that, right? That's not how this works. You kind of gotta break the new person in. You gotta teach them the ropes. You gotta let them get to know everybody a little bit, But keep your eyes going forward, folks. Right back to that theme we started with. Keep your eyes going forward. I love this little light of mine. I'm gonna let it shine. My students used to sing that at me when I'd be teaching them the co-creating reality model. We're not VCRs that go through life like this wondering why we bump into stuff. They couldn't understand that, right? That we are supposed to be sending our light into the world. And your new person will need a lot of help remembering that. And you'll have to get out of your own way, because you'll want to go, well, that's not the way Donna did it. Or, when we had so-and-so, they did it this way, right? So try not to be that person, because I know you don't want to be. And believe me, we don't need that person. Too many of you multiply too quickly. Okay, so thanks for your attention today. Sorry if I went too long, but God bless you all, and I appreciate your attention.